participating in the lightning round. And for those of you who came dressed for the occasion, wonderful. And just kind of fix it up. What I was looking forward to was this nice gallery of all these different splashes of color here and that we would have on everyone. So we went to the Zoom meeting format, which, we're learning about this Whova platform, some of the shortcomings that we've gone through. I mean, it has some great features and functions for the community and to connect with other people at the summit. But when we use the Zoom in the Whova platform, it doesn't allow for this gallery type of view. It would just be whoever's talking would get the image there as well. So we thought we'd mix it up a little bit. And so if you're joining us through Whova, then you're just seeing me. And of course you have options if you're looking through this, through the other areas there. So thanks everyone for sending your slides to us today. We got some, I'll tell you, I was right ready to send this to everyone, and one other coalition came in and had their slides. So we've got them added to this as well. I've heard from a couple of people who had an emergency pop up and they're not able to be here today, but we'll go through those. If you all remember, this is something that we initiated in Dallas last year. Many of you all probably have visions of Kelsey standing over you with the 3, 2, 1 signs to let everybody know that they had 3 minutes to talk and get this through here. But, we came up with these, 3 questions, very straightforward questions, but they're very, they're open-ended, but they also provide a good theme of a national theme. And, as we put these together and look through those, some of the common challenges that are going on across the states, we're looking for, where and if you had a good victory, or your state had a good victory, or your organization did, what were some of the biggest challenges that you had for last year? And then, getting out, maybe not even have to get out the crystal ball. You already know what's in front of you right now coming up into this 4th quarter and going into a new year, what some of the transparency challenges are going to be in your jurisdiction. So we all have presented 3 slides. Each of you all presented 3 slides to answer those questions. We've got about a 3-minute time frame that we're doing for each of those. We have about 21, 22 coalitions, although probably about 20 because we had a couple that are not going to be here, but their slides are presented here as well. And we're going to do it alphabetically, which our first presenter would normally be Jeff on this for Connecticut. But Toby has a conflict and he really wants to be able to present their deck. And of course, me and at W, we can't really guarantee when he's going to be able to get up here to the mic. So we thought we'd let Toby go ahead and kick this off, and I'll do a little bit of informal timekeeping over here, but since we have enough time for this as well, don't feel too pressured. But again, I think 3 minutes is a good time to go through here. We're asking everybody to hold their questions until we get through the end so that everybody has a chance to present. So if you see a slide, and of course I sent your slide deck out, so if you can open it up and follow the slides along with the presenters, so you can watch the presenters over here, watch the slides over here. I think it'll work out well, almost kind of like if we were in person viewing this in some kind of an assembly hall. So let's go ahead and start, and we'll run through this list, and then we'll chat a little bit after it's over. And again, thank you everyone. Is there anything, any house cleaning, any housekeeping matters we need to deal with before we get started? Again, I'm looking forward to seeing close-ups of these shirts here. Yes, Keith, you need to unmute.
Yeah, are we going to get a gong or a buzzer if we go over?
Maybe working frantically. We played around with a lot of sound effects, and we felt that we just, we'll kind of just police this thing and see how it goes. Let's hope everybody just does a nice job of keeping on time here. So, all right. Let's kick it off.
Are you going to run the slide? I'm sorry, Dan. Are you going to run the slide?
No, Ron, if you would open up, I sent the slide deck out to everybody. So if you would just open up the slide deck on your screen. Does everybody have that open? Give Ron here a second to get it open there.
Go ahead.
And everybody should be okay on that. And just like I said, I've got my PowerPoint just sitting over here. And again, apologies to Indiana. But what's so great is you can change that typo right here on your slide deck. And I think I copied Idaho's slide and put it over and then typed out Indiana. So, but I fixed mine. So,
no worries, Dan.
Yeah. Okay, Zachary, thanks. You know, coming from Kentucky, he probably took it personal. So, you know, but it wasn't. All right, so let's start off. Toby for Washington State.
Thanks very much. I'm Toby Nixon, president of the Washington Coalition for Open Government, and I really appreciate you letting me skip the queue. I have a meeting with a state agency coming up here pretty soon to discuss a proposed new exemption for some transportation data, and unfortunately, it can't be moved, but it was really nice of them to at least invite us to the stakeholder meeting. So in Washington, our biggest win of 2020 by far was the state Supreme Court decision that state legislators are subject to the Public Records Act. And this in spite of those legislators' many attempts at stealth amendments over the years to exclude themselves from the law. We've been pleasantly surprised that legislators have not been resisting much and have been pretty good about releasing records. And we were also surprised that no bill was introduced this last session to overturn the court decision. We really expected that. But of course, who knows what will happen in January. Our biggest setback of 2020 was the one really bad bill that passed, House Bill 1888, which was pushed through by public sector labor unions with some really blatant political threats against legislators if they didn't vote for it. The bill exempts from disclosure public employee birth dates, official employee photos, payroll deduction information, demographic information, many things. But worst of all, it mandates that both the employee and their labor union be notified of any request for employee files, even if none of the information is exempt from disclosure. Which of course just introduces delay and means that requesters will have to defend more lawsuits seeking to enjoin release of those files. The biggest challenges we're facing right now are arbitrary delays by agencies in responding to records requests using COVID-19 as an excuse. We look forward to the expiration of the governor's executive orders that have enabled those delays. We had a bad Court of Appeals decision a few years ago that is being interpreted to mean that a lawsuit can't be filed against an agency for illegally withholding or redacting records until the agency decides it's done producing all the records responsive to the request, which of course could be never. We're looking for a good case to use as a vehicle to get the state Supreme Court to overturn that decision. And finally, as a challenge, we're hearing from many of our members across the state that agencies are making important decisions without the usual amount of public engagement, such as stakeholder meetings and town hall meetings, again, all in the name of preventing the spread of COVID-19. These type of meetings have always been discretionary, but most agencies have held them anyway. We're actively trying to convince agencies to restore as much public engagement as possible using online meetings, but too many of them are just claiming to not have the technical capability to do that. So thanks for the opportunity to share, and I'll hang around until I have to hop onto that other call. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Toby. Thank you very much. Okay, good stuff. All right, let's go to Connecticut. Jeffrey.
Connecticut or Colorado?
I'm sorry, Colorado. Wrong state, right person. Yeah.
I'm just a little farther west.
Going you a curve there.
Yeah. So, wait. There we go. I have my slides up. So our biggest win was absolutely the result of the timing. This related to body cam footage. And this is not something we expected to change anytime soon. But after the murder of George Floyd and the killing of Elijah McClain in Colorado, we had protests in Denver and in Colorado, like in many other places. And when the legislature came back into session, legislators were very keen on police accountability and transparency. And if you watched the panel on that the other day, Representative Leslie Herod was one of the panelists, and she had already been thinking about some of these issues, including police body cams. The way the law currently works, although this provision will change in 2023 when it goes into effect, but the way the law has worked is that body cam footage can be withheld by police agencies if they find that disclosure would be, quote, contrary to the public interest. So that gives them an awful lot of discretion. We've had many cases, like in Elijah McClain's case, where it took 3 months for any body cam footage to be released. We've had 9 months, more than a year, for body cam footage to be released, sometimes just portions of it. But under this bill that passed over the summer, it will have to be released within 21 days. And if the agency feels like they need more time because the investigation's ongoing, they can increase that to 45 days, and they have to explain that. The prosecutor has to actually write a statement about why they need more time, and that statement is given to the public when the video is given to the public. And there's some other provisions in there about if the video raises privacy concerns, redaction can happen. There's some other provisions like that, but it's a huge win for Colorado. I wish, the reason I think it's taking 3 years is because there's also a provision that requires every agency to have body cams. And so I think they were waiting for that to giving the agency some time for that. I wish that disclosure provision would happen now. Our setback is one I've mentioned at the last conference because it happened again. Police radio encryption for the 3rd straight year. There was a bill that would have limited police agencies, the trend among police agencies to encrypt all of their radio communications. I'm sure this is happening in other states, but it's happened pretty extensively in Colorado. Makes it much harder for journalists, in particular news organizations, to follow in real time what police are doing, having to rely just on PIOs for information. Once again, there's probably going to be another bill. Representative Herod is interested in this, so we were happy to hear that. So let's hope that there's more success. Coming up, I mentioned, I think at the last conference, that we had helped get this great bill passed that open records on police internal affairs investigations, and that has made a difference, but there are some limitations in that bill. And some agencies are taking advantage of its sort of narrow scope. You have to identify a particular incident, sometimes with a date, and the particular officer, and it had to involve a member of the public. You can't just ask for the disciplinary records of Officer X or anything like that. The city of Denver actually has been making those records available for many years. They got sued a lot, and about a dozen years ago, they decided to make these records available. So we're hoping that legislators will modify this and try to make the state law more in line with what the city of Denver actually does in practice, which is provide a lot of records that most agencies don't provide.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to Connecticut and Colleen Murphy. Welcome. Colleen, you're mute. You need to unmute. There you go.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I was a little worried you were going to ask me to report on Colorado, which, in spite of that wonderful law that Jeff described, I don't think I'd be up to that task. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this today. I'm the executive director of the FOI Commission here in Connecticut, and also a member of our CFOG board. And I'm a lawyer, and I apologize that when Dan says to give 3 slides, I have to give 5. We tend to fill up the room a little bit, but I'll try to be brief. So in terms of the biggest win, I made it the biggest wins in Connecticut. And I would say similar to the situation in Colorado, we were fortunate to have a really good police reform legislation passed that included an FOI component. And it was a component that we had sought, but we're not terribly optimistic we would get. But because of all of the events that happened in the spring and summer particularly, there was renewed enthusiasm for it. So what happened in terms of the FOI piece, which again is part of our larger reform package, the law overturned or really dismantled a contract provision. There's a quirky thing in Connecticut where you can override freedom of information and other laws if you can get it into your union contract. So in this bill, it turned that around. In a state police contract, there was a provision that essentially exempted complaints and internal affairs type records, disciplinary records. And so that was overturned. And the really good news was that it was made retroactive. So it applied to that existing contract and applies to actually all contracts that would contain similar provisions. So we're very happy about that. On the bad news front with it, there's been a federal appeal that has challenged the constitutionality of the legislature doing that. So we'll see how that comes out. I think the second big win for us is simply maintaining operations here at the FOI Commission in Connecticut. Going virtual in an environment where we were certainly not virtual ready. And thanks to our staff, we were able to get telephonic hearings scheduled and get citizens' complaints heard and decided during this time. And also in Connecticut, our governor issued an executive order that was quite positive at a time when other states were kind of allowing people to slow down access or agencies to slow down. Our governor issued an executive order that extended the time restrictions for when citizens have to file their complaints. So it kind of extended the statute of limitations and also allowed the commission, our commission, to have a little extra time to decide complaints rather than to lose jurisdiction over those filings. So that was all good. On the downside, we had a really bad appellate court decision, City of Meriden versus FOIC, with the site there on the slide. It ruled that a leadership group, which consisted of a number of individuals of an agency, but not a quorum, could meet and essentially decide all of their issues and then just bring it before the full agency to rubber stamp those decisions. And we had ruled, the commission had ruled that that was a proceeding and it was subject to our open meetings rules. And the appellate court said, oh no, it's not. There's no quorum. This is not like a court proceeding or anything like that. So leadership groups and other groups, as long as there's less than a quorum, they can essentially make agency decisions outside of the public's view. We're currently awaiting a ruling from the Supreme Court on that, so we'll see how that one turns out. And then the legislature passed a statutory exemption for this entity called the Partnership for Connecticut, Inc. And it's kind of, I'm finding it's a new wave of public agency creation now, these public-private partnerships in Connecticut. And this was created for the purpose of enhancing public education. It came with a $200 million investment of state funds. Many, many public officials were serving on the board, but through this statute that got passed without any public hearing or anything like that, any input, it was entirely exempt from FOI. So that was bad, bad, bad. And I suppose the good news front, the entity imploded of its own accord and is no longer meeting. Now, what's next? Sort of hopeful what's next, I think, in Connecticut. We're hoping for some good legislation, a bill that had been raised for 2 years in a row, I think, or variations on it, to eliminate or reduce costs for copying public records when you use your own cell phone or other device. And a la, I believe it's California, we're hoping that that might pass in Connecticut when it comes up for its third year of consideration. And then the last item for legislation, we're hoping that perhaps we can get some kind of legislation that ensures that public-private partnerships like that one that I described will be actually subject to the FOI Act, or at least there will be some minimal public disclosure requirements and access requirements related to it. So that's what I've got for Connecticut.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. Appreciate that. Let's go over to Delaware and Keith Steck. You are
Hi.
up.
Thank you. My name's Keith Steck. I'm the Vice President of DELCOG, the Delaware Coalition for Open Government. And our primary missions are government accountability and freedom of information access. Since 2016, DELCOG's has raised awareness to the need for reforming the Delaware Limited Liability Company Act. The act reforms permits secrecy of beneficial ownership, and that's unfortunately enabled criminal activity to take place. For example, narcotics trafficking, embezzlement, human trafficking, and money laundering. And money laundering may be the worst prevalent misuse of the act, which functions in effect as a money launderer's de facto Bill of Rights. In 2017, DELCOG drafted legislation for the Delaware House Bill 57 to address the LLC crimes by requiring registered agents to cross-check their sanctions list at the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is part of the Treasury Department. And the Delaware House Judiciary Committee tabled discussion on HB 57 after two attorneys who work for a prominent Delaware corporate law firms spoke out against the bill. But we kept pushing for demands. In December of last year, we had at our annual meeting the Attorney General, Kathy Jennings, speak about the need for these LLC reforms. And just a few weeks ago, she took proactive steps, and she decisively signed a memorandum of understanding with the Office of Foreign Assets Control, similar to HB 57 that's been stalled. So we have a similar initiative underway, raising awareness for federal legislation to address this kind of corporate anonymity. And through our efforts, we've gotten our representative. Delaware only has one, but we have gotten our representative to co-sponsor it's called the Corporate Transparency Act, which passed the House, the US House. So, and if you give me a second here, I'm going to switch over to the next slide, next two slides really. And a year ago, DELCOG was really not addressing police reforms. One of the reasons is 10% of the Delaware General Assembly, the members of the General Assembly are current or former law enforcement officers, including the Speaker of the House. All of that changed as a result of the police use of force actions that have become known across the country that have triggered, protest, et cetera. So as a result of that, the Legislative Black Caucus was instrumental in setting up what's called the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force. And it has 4 subcommittees. And DELCOG has been appointed to the Transparency and Accountability Subcommittee. And yours truly is actually one of the members on that subcommittee. So we are now working on reforms, on substantive reforms, and including revising Delaware's bill of what's called the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. It's for police officers, really, which is very restrictive. And then also updating the Freedom of Information Act, because it needs to be consistent with what proposals we come up with. And then the last slide is something that we feel that needs to be put in place is a statewide Inspector General's office. So we are working on that. And for those who don't know what an IG is, they They generally focus on and try to stop crime, corruption, waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement in state agencies. And the need for this office is clear. There are a number of issues with agencies that really are sort of neglectful of the responsibilities in our view, and including environmental justice issues and the like. And it'll provide, we're expecting it to provide quite a bit more increased accountability and oversight, and overcome partisan politics that have prohibited past investigations.
Great. All right. Thank you, Keith. And a report from Delaware. And let's go to the District of Columbia. Tom Sussman, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Tom Sussman. I'm president of the DC Open Government Coalition. In preparing for this, I was able to look over last year's 3 slides, and it was pretty depressing, actually. But I'll move right to our wins. Our coalition was involved in the establishment of an Office of Open Government for the district about 8 years ago, and we've been fighting to keep it independent. One of our losses reported last year was it seemed to have been subsumed under a board that was supposed to be placed under for just administrative purposes, but the Board of Ethics and Accountability had sort of taken a little more control through the legislation. But it turned out that was unfounded fear. It was not a loss. The Office of Open Government has not only been independent, but we've succeeded in getting a couple of new positions established, so it's growing. And in my view, that really, fighting a lot of these battles from the inside is an extremely important way of making progress in these local governments. Body cams have been talked about. Police-worn body cameras I almost can talk about them as a wins, losses, and challenges. We had a win in preventing total non-disclosure legislation on a few years ago. Current emergency bills provide that the mayor orders release within 5 days if there's been a shooting or death. That seemed to be at least a little bit of progress. There's legislation pending. One of our challenges is to try to open things up more. The loss is that even when the video cams are made public, and there have been some recently, there is cost, delay, and over-redaction that we had a program earlier today. Jeff participated on. We used an example from DC, and all of the faces of everyone, bystanders, police, victims, etc., are all totally redacted, even though the event is outside and there are lots of people standing around. Some of them you can see holding cameras up. So in any event, that's a continuing challenge. We've been fighting, and that was on last year's challenges, to get more access to public charter schools, where half of the DC students are educated and almost half of the funding goes there. It is likely, with pending legislation, that there will be Open Meetings Act application with very large exemptions that we're fighting against, but no FOIA in view. And finally, moving to the losses, again, we had a disappointment, not necessarily a loss. We had planned an annual summit for March, early March, and you can imagine what happened to that. That was even before we knew that there was a Zoom alternative. It slowed down our networking with the community, but we did have the basic core of the summit earlier today, with a police body camera program, and over 40 people attended, which is not a bad level of attendance for an open government event at noon. Then, I think the last loss is we've been trying to get the names of schools in the district where there have been substantiated sexual abuse or harassment complaints. And it's been appealed to the mayor's office, gone up and down. It's now gone over, I've got 6 or 8 months of just back and forth. And they finally said, well, FOIA will apply. We do have the records, but we're applying the privacy exemption to the names of the schools. So I expect there will be a lawsuit there if we don't get that changed administratively. And finally, challenges. I had challenges last year. FOIA reform legislation. District is way out of line in terms of even confronting the digital era in terms of FOIA. The law hasn't been amended in decades, but the chairman of our council remains simply hostile to all things relating to the Freedom of Information Act. And so that becomes a very long-term challenge. We're not going to give it up, but we know better than to run at it head on. In fact, the chairman rejuggled committee jurisdiction to take FOIA out of the Judiciary Committee and put it into the Committee of the Whole that he chairs. The most current issue we have now, we've joined a group of community organizations trying to end the suspension of FOIA deadlines during the declaration of the COVID pandemic. Basically, it means that the agencies don't have to respond. Some of them do, a lot of them don't. And so we're trying to get that back on track, and we may wind up having to agree to an extra 10 days for agencies to be able to respond to requests. So I guess if I listed it down, many more losses and challenges than wins in the past year, but that's why we're here.
That's right. All right, Tom, thanks a lot. Good to hear from the district there. All right, let's switch over to Florida right now. Pamela Marsh. How are you doing, Pamela?
I'm doing well, thank you. I think someone tinkered with my slides because my titles look weird now, but at any rate, happy to be here. I'm the new president of the Florida First Amendment Foundation. I wanted to start just by saying our wins are that we have a healthy staff now. We have Virginia Hamrick, who's just joined us as our staff counsel. She's brilliant. She's an attorney, just graduated from University of Florida and has a journalism background. And we also have Erica Benton, who's been with us for a while. She's our legacy from the years before and keeps us going in the right direction. Since we've been around for 35 years and Virginia and I are both new to the territory, Erica keeps us straight. Our biggest wins, and I was going to start a timer myself. Our biggest win was at the legislature, I believe. You can see on the right side of the slide, it's been since 2012 that we've had a single digit, and it's been since 2010 that we've been as low as 7. So only 7 exemptions passed this year. There are almost 1,160 exemptions to Florida public records law. So it was good that we tried to keep it down, and that's a fight we'll continue to fight. Also, we started a podcast, which we're now on episode 5, will be released, I think, tomorrow. We've had some great guests, and it's been a nice way to both expand our audience and sort of give some new enthusiasm to our newsletter. We send out our podcast with our bi-monthly, I guess twice a month, we send out this newsletter. And so it's nice to have a little extra content and something exciting to send people to, and then it does direct them to our website as well. So that's been kind of a fun new technology for us to add into our repertoire. On our losses, it says obvious loss is the coronavirus and money, but we're fighting the good fight against that, and we've got a great virtual event. I hope you will all think about buying tickets and coming because it will be really fun. Carl Hyacin and Dave Barry, two of our funniest Floridian authors. They've done this before around political events. And Wednesday, October 21st is 1 week after the presidential debate in Miami, and it's 1 day before the final presidential debate. So I think they'll have a lot of great material. You can either just buy a flat ticket, or you can buy a ticket that would entitle you to an autographed, signed copy of one of their new books. So we're really looking forward to that and hoping to really make it a national event. So if you want to ping me, and I'd be happy to send you the little graphic that we have there, and maybe you can put it in your newsletter or on your website and get some of your folks to attend to. I think it'll be just a lot of fun, and we could use the monetary support. Finally, I've got 32 seconds to wrap it up. Marsy's Law applied. We've gotten a great order out of our trial court. The police union here in Tallahassee said that law enforcement officers should be shielded as victims under Marsy's Law, even when they're involved in fatal use of force. And we've had 3 killings here, and none of the law enforcement officers have been identified. So we got a great win at the trial level. We've got an expedited appellate review going now. Oh, and there's my timer going off, telling me it's 3 minutes. So anyway, a lot of stuff going on with respect to Marsy's Law. Inconsistent application, lots of law enforcement using it for reasons not intended to the victims, or to be victims. Really, the amendment was to give victims rights in court, not to hide, especially law enforcement, when they engage in violent acts. But it's being applied very inconsistently, and we're hoping that this court challenge will result in a good ruling and really help our state go back to public records law and not this amendment when it's dealing with law enforcement officers and records. So there you go.
Great. Thanks, Pamela. Appreciate that. And let's switch over to the other side of the planet, and Guam, and William Iglesias is with us. William? Hey, William. Welcome.
Hi, guys. I got used to the dark screen and watching everyone there. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm William Iglesias from Guam. I'm the executive director for the Vigilance Committee. It's 5 o'clock in the morning here, and I think this is I'm on an island, but we don't really wear island shirts, when we're on an island. So this is new. I found this flamingo shirt I'm rocking right now. Anyway. One of the biggest wins of 2019 for the Vigilance Committee, of course, was when the Vigilance Committee obtained the public records identifying 2 healthcare facilities that had 17 medical workers that tested positive for COVID. Previously, during the onset of COVID-19 here in Guam, the governor had refused to disclose the facilities or these hot spots, of course, to protect the businesses and her business interests and friends. And the media had relentlessly tried to get a hold of this information. And it was through our freedom of information and transparency advocacies that we were able to start the ball and get the information. The biggest setback of 2019 was the gutting of the open government law, as we have seen in many other states by our governor. And probably the most disappointing setback was the concurrence of our elected Attorney General, who supported the open government law, the gutting of the open government law, which basically removed the enforcement aspects, which would allow government agencies, boards, and commissions to act on behalf of the government without informing the public, without any checks and balances, without following the procurement laws that were set in place. So the biggest win is when we actually went up against them publicly, advocating against that type of action. The governor, of course, had a little token, a token remedy, which she then allowed agencies to inform the public online through the Attorney General's office. So even today, we are still battling the open government law, the restoration of the open government law. And that probably is our next challenge, which our committee is now, in light of a lot of the shortcomings of our own FOIA laws, the open government law, we have, or we are planning to lobby the legislative branch of government to amend these laws, to, of course, amend the superpowers of the governor during a pandemic. And, you know, I think that we will be successful considering it's election time, you know, but we are looking ahead in the future for this new legislative body in 2021 and seeing how we can, through legislation, strengthen the freedom of information laws here. That's it.
All right, sorry about that. UPS delivery and a big dog. Anyways, William, thank you so much. And we're really happy to have Vigilance Committee among the coalition members, very much so. All right, let's go over to Betsy in Idaho. What's going on with IDOG over there, Betsy?
There, let's try that again. I'm Betsy Russell, president of IDOG. And here in Idaho, we had a big win in court this year. And it was actually the Idaho Press Club, of which I am also president, that won a public records lawsuit against the state's largest county, which had just been completely ignoring the public records law and writing up its own excuses for why it wasn't releasing things. They did this to multiple reporters around the state from multiple different news organizations. And I need to credit my Idaho Press Club vice president and First Amendment chair, Melissa Davlin, who really spearheaded this lawsuit. Not only did we win, we got a strongly worded opinion from the judge on how our government needs to comply with the Idaho Public Records Act to the letter. The county turned over the records at issue, decided not to appeal, and the press club was awarded $47,310 in attorney fees. So cool, our attorneys actually got paid. Also, the IDOG board sent a letter to the governor and the state health and welfare director demanding that information on COVID-19 outbreaks at Idaho nursing homes be made public in the interest of transparency. And they had been completely hiding that information, not naming nursing homes at which there were outbreaks. The IDOG board sent its letter around the same time that the AARP of Idaho sent a similar letter, and the Idaho Statesman newspaper threatened a lawsuit. And the response was immediate to our letter from both the governor and the state health and welfare director, both of whom contacted me personally, and said we had really good points and that information was going to be released. It is now published weekly. So those were our wins. Our losses. The Idaho legislature, over our strong objections, passed a new public records exemption for legislators and public officials. And it was awful. And basically they were arguing that, oh, all these public records requests are just such a pain in the butt and, you know, it's burdensome, and it was horrible. They did negotiate with us. They did soften it. The big change is that now the names and email addresses of citizens who contact legislators are exempt from disclosure. However, the body of the message remains public. And I have to say that our fear for the last several years was that they were going to completely exempt all constituent contacts with legislators, which they had threatened to do. So they did not do that. we lost the personal identifying information, but we still get the message. As far as what's next in Idaho, we will continue our fight against bad legislation. There may be a new media-sponsored bill coming up this next year to correct some backward steps in disclosure by the Idaho Secretary of State's office. And I don't know yet, if IDOG decides to take the 501H election, we may sponsor it, or it may be sponsored by a whole array of groups, media, and otherwise. We'll see. And we are continuing to work toward an intermediate level of appeal for public records denials. We are also continuing to monitor openness of virtual public meetings in our state. One positive step was that prior to issuing COVID-related executive orders suspending a clause of the Idaho Open Meeting Law, the governor's office actually contacted me and wanted to consult with us and with the press club about their proposal. And the only clause of the open meeting law that they decided to suspend was the one that requires, when there's a meeting that takes place solely by telecommunications, that there be a physical location where at least one member of the board or a staffer is present and where the public can come. They wanted to suspend the physical location. And in return, they offered to post all meeting materials online and to ensure telecommunications access for the public to listen, at least, if not watch, all public meetings. And so we said yes. And it has worked pretty well, but we're continuing to monitor it. There have been some issues, not with that clause, but with agencies that weren't so good about keeping the public access open. So that's where we're headed.
Hey, thanks, Betsy. Congratulations on that, especially with getting the attorney fees awarded.
That
Excellent.
was awesome.
All right. Marie Dillon had contacted me from Better Government Association and from Illinois, and she had to step out and was not going to be able to be here. She did have her slides, and so we've got those from BGA that you all can take a look at as well. And again, we're really happy to have BGA also as one of the new coalitions presenting this year there. So let me switch over to Zachary in Indiana and the Hoosier State. Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please.
Or
welcome.
Indiana, you know, however it's on the slide.
Yeah, I think
we'll
Indiana works better.
Yeah. It matters how fast you say it. So much like some of the other states that have presented, our biggest win was around some of the COVID-19 data, and we were working with the Indiana State Health Department, and we got them to actually also release some pretty extensive raw JSON data that they were using to power their dashboard that they had on the State Department of Health website. However, in a recent update about 2.5-3 weeks ago, they did change some of the data that they were releasing. So we're working with them again to get that expanded, because that has provided a great way to analyze a lot what was going on. And plenty of data columns were not actually visualized that were still in the data set. So we thought that that was great, that we were able to get that going, working with different media organizations across the state. And then likewise, we found actually a giant uptick in expanded access to public meetings because lots of agencies were actually going online, whether it was just a telemeeting or full out Zoom meetings or GoToMeetings or whatever the case may be, which really forced them to start archiving online. Some started actually streaming on YouTube for the first time. And so we really see that as a nice positive wave going through, not directly because of us, but just in the environment. And that's one thing that we're going to make sure that we don't go backwards on, is that now all of these places that are transmitting and putting the information online, they continue to do so. However, with that, going to setbacks, like I mentioned, they did regress on some of that raw data from ISDH, and we did likewise advocate to get the long-term healthcare facility information released, and that is happening weekly most of the time. The extended access to public meetings was happening. However, some agencies sadly started removing public comment where they had it before. And so there is no way for the public to actually engage in real time in those sessions. So not always are the chat rooms open, or there's even a way to dial in. And so that's something we're working on a one-off basis and trying to write up a white paper of best practices of how to actually achieve that. Many sadly cite, as I'm sure you all have heard, the excuses of, oh, Zoom bombers coming in and agitating at a meeting or the like, that it's not incapable. But obviously, if we can do something like this, or other places can do giant conferences, why can't a government agency also have the city council online? And then likewise with other people, hearing a plethora of excuses because of the pandemic in terms of actually releasing public records. And so in Indiana, there isn't a hard, fast dissemination. There is on responses, and that has remained high. However, the releasing of documents, everyone's saying, oh, we're understaffed, oh, we're working on other things. And so those turnaround times have been going down. And then biggest challenges for us is we're trying to move towards also assembling the data that's available here in Indiana and getting that out and in people's minds of what's available. And so just making sure that not only we can have a good idea of where different agencies are across the state at all levels in terms of doing their public meetings, but then also making sure that we find and connect with different organizers or activists in those areas to ensure that those agencies stay open and stay accessible. And so probably creating a feedback loop with all those individuals is going to be the other big challenge that we're facing, just due to all the new interest from individuals or organizations in government and in public records, especially in light of all the police violence that's been happening. So good to hear that some of it is similar. Glad to hear about all the wins with everyone. But yeah, appreciate being here. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Zachary. Thanks for that report on Indiana. Next, we have Iowa. The Iowa Freedom of Information Council. Randy Evans prepared and submitted the slides, but he contacted me and said that he was not going to be able to attend today. But he has his slides in here. And just to point out, you know, one of the things that we're looking at here are these police reform measures that are moving in 2020. And they had, when you get a chance to take a look at his slides, they've had a case that they've been working on since 2018 that the murder of George Floyd and others this year seem to have really helped to move that one along. That was a big victory for them in Iowa, for Randy and his team. For Kentucky, the next deck, Amy Benson-Haver is not able to be here today as well. She had an emergency that she had to tend to, but also provided her slides there as well. And so let's move on over to Kansas. And Ron Kiefover, you know, Ron, if we didn't have this pandemic, we'd be sitting in your town having barbecue right now and enjoying this and looking forward to that. But we are planning to return in a couple of years to Kansas City. But let's go ahead and switch over to Ron. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan. By the way, little unknown fact for you all, the Kansas City Barbecue Society has been presenting virtual barbecue contests, and I'm a certified judge. I've judged 3 of those virtual contests, and so you can do everything except taste, I guess.
Yeah. Boy, that'd be torture, I think.
Yeah, it's hard, but any event, all the live ones have been canceled until this fall. I'm lined up for several later this fall. Big wins in Kansas. We got a bill, I call it a win/loss. We got a bill through the legislature last session that mandates release of police videos involving deaths, but it was amended to make it available to families only and not to the media. It is discretionarily available to the media. We want a uniform state law regarding that. We did have a major victory in a town whose city council decided that everything having to do with the dismissal of their city manager and the hiring of his successor ought to be secret, including a blank form they used to have the applicants for the position fill out after extended complaints and action that took us to the State Attorney General's office. The city was ordered to do that. That one proviso that the city came up with is to publish the amount of money records request on their website. It's kind of I guess, a tool to embarrass citizens who were making those requests. In any event, the council was ordered to release, fined, and then directed to attend the Kansas Sunshine Coalition open government trainings that we do regionally, statewide. The loss part of that is that because of COVID, we weren't able to present our regional education trainings. We do 5 or 6 across the state each year, which are open to the public, but in particular public officials. So that's all on hold until the cloud lifts. The coalition is on a state task force to present online open government training. We have now completed 6 training videos for that project, so that's a win. Meanwhile, we did have a win with the cluster or COVID cluster case reporting. The governor had mandated release of names of businesses or any entity that has had 5 or more cases, except the meat processing plants, which is in the coalition view and others, a major place that we ought to know whether there are cluster outbreaks. And after the coalition was among the leaders, press association, broadcast associations weighed in on it, the governor then exempted the exemption from meat packing plants, so their numbers are available as well on a weekly basis. Setbacks. Well, I just mentioned the COVID-19 cancellation of our open records and open meeting seminars. We are, and I was particularly interested in the session on legislative bill tracking, but we are in the 6th year of attempting to get a statute enacted to order video streaming of committee hearings at the legislature. What's to come? We have 2 precedent-setting appeals in progress. The Kansas Sunshine Coalition has joined the amicus briefs in. One is another special interest statute, actually enacted in 1990, that prohibits the unauthorized photography or recording inside of a meat packing plant. And some of my older colleagues will probably recall that in the I think the 70s and 80s there was a series of reports by 60-minute type programs where they would sneak into a meat processing plant and depict unsanitary handling. In any event, that resulted in what's called an ag-gag law in Kansas and many other states. That law has been struck down by the federal courts and something now on appeal to the 10th Circuit. And meanwhile, there's a state of Kansas lawsuit filed over a agency's decision that they cannot be required to produce their records in electronic format. Rather, they have to be in hard copy and subject to the 25 cents a page fee or whatever it is. So the lower court has struck that down, and the agency has now appealed to, actually it's the state of Kansas and the governor's office now appealed to the Court of Appeals. So that's what's coming.
All right, Ron, thanks a lot. All right, we're on our back 9 now here. And our timing is good. So let's switch over to Missouri and Dennis Ellsworth. Welcome. You had to unmute. There you go.
I got it there. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Missouri is glad to be back in your good graces with this group. We were dormant and near death, I think, before I came along, volunteer work and then part-time work to try to resuscitate this group with some very willing board members. And over the last 9 months, we've gone from barely a pulse to a pretty steady pulse, but we have a lot to do. But I should have listed that as our biggest win so far, is that we are functioning now with some great hope for the future. We've got some great new board members, and and some new contacts, particularly at the University of Missouri, with some honor students and professors who are going to help us improve a lot of the things we do on a shoestring. And so we also have in the state about a 15-year history of the coalition aspiring to do the work that you all do, and have had some modest successes, but have been pretty supportive in the areas of awareness and education. We have a good partnership with the Missouri Press Association, which does a lot of our legislative tracking. As far as biggest wins beyond getting the organization, keeping it alive and extending its brand this year, we had two that I've noted there. The University of Missouri was agreed to pay $175,000 to settle an open records lawsuit, and the Missouri Department of Human and Senior Services is about $162,000. Our problems are your problems, where people try to do things to avoid providing records by putting big cost estimates out there, even though technology and common sense says they don't have to do that. And both of these cases involve nonprofit groups, something called the Beagle Freedom Project. They clearly don't want beagles going under a knife there at the University of Missouri. And Reclaim the Records, which works in a number of states seeking genealogical records for historic research. And these groups persisted over a number of years. They retained attorneys here in Missouri that knew what they were doing, and they both won pretty strong judgments from judges who pointed to the facts that showed that they had communications showing that there were active efforts to just make these people go away. And so we're thrilled by those two victories, because getting enforcement behind our Sunshine Law is one of our biggest needs. As far as setbacks, we made our biggest push on this particular issue, trying to get the Missouri Department of Health and Human and Senior Services to provide more data about nursing homes of COVID cases. They read a law and interpreted it to mean that they could do nothing more than say if a particular facility in a particular county, they could say that a facility had at least one case. And everything beyond that, we had to pry out of local government officials who cared as much as the media did about this information being out in public. And that's where the status currently stands, in fact, although we have had quite a bit of information released because a lot of other well-intentioned and wise people decided, this information needs to come out, and they're reading the law wrong. But I'm sure we'll be pursuing more of that in the coming session. As far as biggest challenges, we have a challenge, and I know that Dan, the group looks for these kind of trends. And maybe the horse has left the barn here, but we're fighting the same issue in Missouri with legislators closing down their records. There's no doubt in our mind that this is something that's being fueled in the background around the country when they go to their meetings and saying, hey, you all should do this. It was written into a law previously, into a House rule. And so in 2018, the Missourians passed a constitutional amendment that basically said you can't do that. You can't take your legislative records and lock them down. You're governed by the Sunshine Law. So then they passed another House rule saying they could get around that. And then they were going to try to make it a permanent law before the COVID hit. That will be back next year, and it will be a big fight, I'm sure. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, let's switch over to Nevada, and Patrick File, Nevada. Great to have them among the coalitions and presenting for the first time here. So Patrick, good to have you with us.
Oh yeah, thanks Dan. Yeah, Patrick File here, president of the Nevada Open Government Coalition, part of the New Kids on the Block, I guess, along with Missouri, or at least the we're brand new in Missouri. Glad to hear that they're sort of back in the fold. Yeah, so we, this in fact is my second NFOIC summit in a row. I was on a paper panel at the last one down in Dallas, and Dan and Kelsey and other NFOIC's folks kind of put the pressure campaign on and said, hey, Nevada doesn't have an open government coalition. What do you think about seeing whether folks have an appetite for that? And it just so happened sort of that around that same time, there was a ragtag coalition informally being formulated around a piece of legislation that did pass here in Nevada. That was a major public records reform bill. So last fall, I started trying to draw some people together to see what we could do to put together a coalition. We were founded in January of 2020. I'm really happy and proud with the diverse board of 17 directors that we have gotten together. We kind of put together a formal public launch for Sunshine Week in the spring of this year, which you might recall coincided with also the kind of first few weeks of sort of true panic and response publicly to the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic. But we, I think, broke through some of the noise a little bit and also had a favorable Supreme Court ruling to kind of tag our launching to. That was a case that involved an investigation records into a school district employee who had, or trustee who had allegedly behaved inappropriately, and the state Supreme Court ruled that record should be public. So we kind of had that as a news hook. And we've been engaging on some pretty key policy and legislative issues. In the meantime, we've had 2 special sessions. Our legislature meets biannually, and from February to June of every other year. But we did have 2 special sessions that were focused on a big budget crisis here, and then also on sort of social justice issues and police accountability. And we were able to coordinate a bit with some other groups, some of whom are members of our board on that. So I'd say just our biggest win of the year so far has just been getting off the ground. I conducted a satisfaction survey with board members back in August just to see where people thought we were standing, and a lot of folks had good things to say about the broad coalition that we built, and that just sort of making our existence known to political leaders and the public has been a good thing, and we've been successful in that. Biggest setback, I'll join the parade of slides that have some form of graphic of the coronavirus on it. I would say that for our purposes, the 2 main reasons that was a setback for us was that it certainly inhibited some of our board members' engagement involvement, either because of just, for whatever sector they're working in, their jobs got sort of suddenly harder and more difficult. And so it was difficult to be involved and engaged, or with the other nonprofits that they might be involved with, from the ACLU to we have the National Alliance for Mental Illness is represented on our group, and so a lot of folks sort of having to kind of pivot back to their work there. And it also sort of dominated our policy and engagement work. I would say overall we haven't backslid too badly. I'd say we fall right into the middle statewide of other states with dealing with the challenges of public records in particular, and open meetings a little bit on the government response to coronavirus. We do have some very active and engaged news organizations that have been working very hard to keep those records public. Indeed, they've had to kind of fight quite a bit, but we're probably not as bad as some states and not as good as some others, but that certainly has dominated a lot of what our policy and engagement work has been. Our biggest challenge, I think, for 2020 and 2021, as I say, is going to be emerging from the COVID cloud. I think, we'll hopefully get a chance in the coming 12 to 18 months to start to kind of balance some of that policy work with some of the public outreach and education that we want to do as well. We've been working on developing a communications plan. We do have a legislative session that's coming up that will start in February of 2021. And we'd like to key our communications to what we're doing in the legislature. I think based on what I've heard from our policy committee and our legislative committee, I think that we'll be likely playing a little bit more defense and kind of trying to whack-a-mole exemptions to the public records law as they come up, rather than trying to get a bill through. Obviously trying to just get our board members back involved collectively, and building a fundraising strategy. We got our state articles of incorporation through, and we have our 501c3 status. So now the next step is to get some money going so we can start supporting our programming. So happy to be here. I'm looking forward to a long and lovely partnership and friendship with NFOIC and all of the rest of you.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Glad to have you with us. Now, we've got New Mexico next, but Melanie Majors had contacted me as well and was not going to be able to be here to present her slides. So let's move over to North Carolina and Brooks Fuller. Glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, glad. Sure. Yeah, glad to be here. Wish I was eating barbecue with you all too. So our first major success was a lawsuit that's been brewing for quite some time finally wound its way up through the court system, and we got a very favorable ruling in the North Carolina Supreme Court involving a dispute over the interplay between our public records law and FERPA. This is an issue that comes up constantly, especially in states with big flagship public universities that like to hide everything behind FERPA, which is probably all of us. The case hinged on this interplay between FERPA, where the University of North Carolina, in response to a public records request for records of disciplinary action in sexual assault cases, said that they had the discretion to withhold records for the sake of student privacy under FERPA, and the Supreme Court in North Carolina ruled that that is not the case. This is a big success because it ends years of litigation and also maybe opens up some paths to getting sexual assault disciplinary records in from our other dozen or more public universities, as well as some of our neighboring jurisdictions. This might act as some guidance or some influence. The decision's a 4-3 decision, so it's not a monumental win, and it also might get appealed up to the United States Supreme Court. There's still time for them to file their petition for a writ of cert up to SCOTUS. And so this isn't completely finished up yet, but nevertheless, it's a big win. One of the ways that it is a win and also societally a pretty tremendous loss is that it revealed that UNC has only made a determination of guilt in 15 cases over the last 13 years in Title IX sexual assault cases. That number should shock you. It is a shocking number. But that does shed light on how big of a failure UNC has perpetuated. And that's just one university. One of our biggest setbacks is, so several months ago, I reported to you all that we had an amendment that was filed as a bill, HB 1111, that was introduced in May 2020 that was going to enshrine the right to know, as well as a sunshine provision in our North Carolina Constitution. And like a lot of constitutional amendments that go to ballot referenda, especially one like this, we thought that it'd have a really serious chance of success. Well, I don't think this is completely related to COVID, but it couldn't have helped. It stalled in committee despite some really important bipartisan support. So we really thought that it would push through, but it could never get to a floor vote and wind up on our ballot. And so about in, I guess August, the writing was kind of on the wall that we would have to try this again, which means probably doing it again in the next big midterm or a quadrennial. So 2 or 4 years from now, we expect to work on it again, but that's a loss for us. And then since there are little rays of sunshine, little rays of sunlight for us and silver linings, we've got 2 new collaborations with other collaborators in North Carolina. One that we've launched that's going to, we voted about a week ago to fund a small data, campaign finance data dashboard project that came to us through a collaboration with a Code for America brigade in the Raleigh area. This is a group of civic technology enthusiasts and hackers, for lack of a better word, that put together a data dashboard project that pulls campaign finance data from our State Board of Elections website, which is remarkably terrible. But the data dashboard that they've built will hopefully help us sort, analyze, report on, and maybe even advocate on campaign finance issues in the state. So we're partnering with folks in Raleigh and in Durham, as well as in Silicon Valley in California with a group called Code for Democracy that is going to help us on a data analysis project, and hopefully can use this to springboard some bigger, better funding down the line. One other thing that we've been working on is a group that has come to inhabit physically a similar place as us. We're based at Elon University in North Carolina, and a group was started called the North Carolina Local News Lab, which also has a North Carolina Local News Workshop that does a lot of small convenings, training sessions, hands-on stuff for journalists and students in our state. And so we've been able to partner with them on about 3 or 4 quick hitters on elections things, COVID data access issues, and things like that that are common in North Carolina and other places. So we see this as a really big opportunity for the future to do more work with them. So that's
great.
3.
All right. Thanks, Brooks. And I tell you, I would like to move back a letter to New Mexico. Melanie, I see you are with us here. I'm so sorry if I looked over you or you slipped in behind us here, but welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. You need to unmute there.
It's been a crazy day, and I'm going to do a plug before I get started. Bob Woodward is the guest speaker at our event on Thursday, and today we had a little wrinkle, so I've been in and out all day, but I appreciate it. Thank you all for giving me some time. And as the slides show, I didn't divide it up into a couple of things. We actually had a huge victory in the last 12 months. The Supreme Court in the state of New Mexico passed down went ahead with what the appellate court had done and said that third-party contractors, if they had records, those records were subject to our Inspection of Public Records Act. That's what we call our statewide FOIA. And so that was a huge victory for not only the state of New Mexico, for citizens, but for FOG. FOG had filed an amicus brief in that session. And so we were really, really happy that the Supreme Court, the appellate court, et cetera, agreed with us that if someone was doing work on behalf of the public, then those records were public. It was a huge, huge win for us. Second thing that we did this year is we did our first survey of all of the candidates that are currently seeking this office in the state legislature. And we really only focused on one area. It was our legislative budgeting process, which is pretty much handled all behind closed doors. It's sort of, they get halfway, 3/4 way into the legislative session. And it's like, oh, here's the budget, which of course doesn't allow for any input, any comment, et cetera. Just to back up, we have a citizen legislature in New Mexico. In even years, they meet for 60 days. In odd years, they meet for 30 days. In the odd years, the only thing they can really discuss is the budget. Even years, it's everything. And they always have the governor's call and then the other items. And then the other item that we were really pleased with this year came about during the legislature when the governor signed a bill requiring the immediate release of settlement agreements in damages against state agencies. This is something that we had pushed for quite some time. Under the previous law, the settlement agreements were held in secret for 180 days after the final ruling in the case, which in some cases could take up to 1.5 years for all the paperwork to be filed. If you had a lazy clerk or someone didn't file the right papers, et cetera. And so this bill by the governor made it very, very clear that immediate access to settlements that were filed against the state were important. It's the public's money, and the public had every right to know where it was going and to know so immediately. One of our biggest setbacks was a bill that came up very late in the session. It was the public sector collective bargaining changes. And we felt, because of some of the language in the bill, some of the language was poor. It was a poorly written bill. We felt that some of the language was really troublesome. And under this bill that she did sign, it would deny citizens public access to information about public employees' hire dates, their salaries, their work locations, and their work phone numbers. that was one of the things that we had pushed again to have the governor veto, but she is a Democrat. She was highly supported by the unions, and we were not going to win that fight. Looking forward, our legislature meets again in January, and our big push with FOG is to, again, take the information that we've gotten from our survey and use that in our legislative work going forward. We'll probably do some advertising, either print, electronic, etc. We'll be sending out more information to other candidates. Once the election is finished, they'll actually be the legislators, and then we do plan on using it in our lobbying efforts in the Senate and in the House come January. And as I said, our big news this week is that Bob Woodward is going to be the guest speaker at our event on Thursday. Tickets are still available. If you're interested, you can send me an email at director@nmfog.org. Tickets are $30 a piece. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. And anyone who's interested, be happy to have you join us. And any questions? Or I think I used my 3 minutes.
Well, that's great, Melanie. Thanks so much, and glad you're with us, and good luck on your event this Thursday. Let's switch over to Oklahoma and Andy Moore. Andy, what's going on in Oklahoma there?
Hey, everybody. We have beautiful weather this week. This is our week of fall. So check back next week when winter sets in. I'm sure that's what will happen. So here in Oklahoma, at this point in our conversation, some of my things may be repetitive given what other people have said, but our big win, I guess, for this year was back in the spring. We sent out letters and emails to as many cities and town clerks as we could get contact info for, district attorneys, police chiefs, state agency heads, VOTEX, and school districts, with the goal of asking all of these groups to sign a resolution acknowledging Sunshine Week and basically just kind of pledging that they will uphold the law for Open Meeting Act and Open Records Act. And we thought it would be a good gesture. For one, it's like a subtle reminder to lots of folks who forget about the transparency laws of like, don't forget, this is out there, this is a thing. And also, please publicly say that you'll do it. And we got a number of responses. I think the largest city was the city of Norman, which is where OU is located. And that was pretty great that they did it. The problem was that we sent it out, you know, it was like getting close to Sunshine Week. So we wanted it to kind of be fresh in people's minds. So we missed a lot of February deadlines for like their meetings. And then of course, COVID hit, right? Like 2 weeks later. And so whatever that next meeting was, we had a lot of groups, organizations or entities that said, we'll put it on our next meeting. And then the next meeting went into the crapper because everyone was like starting to lock down, right? So after the NBA game here, when everything went haywire, we got roughly 12 responses, I think, out of the 1,400 we sent out. On the plus side is that I already have all the label addresses and email addresses ready to go for next year, so we can send it out a little bit earlier and try to get folks. The goal is they will respond online and it will automatically populate into a spreadsheet on our website. The truth is, I got a bunch of letters that were signed by people I don't know, and I had to look at the return postmark to figure out where they came back from. The town of Fletcher, or, you know, some mountain spring. I don't know where there's a mountain spring in Oklahoma. I don't know where there's hardly mountains in Oklahoma. And to William there in the chat, I'm happy to provide you with a copy of the resolution that we wrote up. The biggest setback this year, of course, was COVID and its impact on our funding, which has been grim. The actual like implications for open meetings were not notably worse than just everyday life, I think, with our government. And this really goes into our challenges for next year. So the state legislature, you know, was in session in Oklahoma. They're in session February through May. And so right in the middle of that is when this happened. And so everything stopped. They just quit meeting for a couple of weeks. They focused on passing a budget, knowing that this was going to have implications there. And the budget situation was already not great in Oklahoma. It is terrible now, as it is, I'm sure, for all of you. So they really scrapped almost everything except for what had to get through. And that was, they had to pass changes to Open Meeting Act to allow public entities to meet virtually, because that was not part of our law. And so they are not exclusively virtually. And so they did that and then passed the budget and pretty much went home. A couple other, pet projects, but they had an interim study last week about what they will do next year. And that remains to be seen. On the plus side, of course, virtual meetings are great. They do theoretically improve accessibility and some transparency if they're done correctly. That is not always what happens, particularly in small towns, places with poor internet access, which is a lot of Oklahoma that doesn't have high-speed internet access. And we have seen in a lot of cities, right, in small towns where folks have used virtual meetings as a way to hide from the public. Maybe they're on the camera like we are now, but they're not face-to-face having to take hard votes. And so despite what the Attorney General said, people were claiming that they would be in person for the meeting and then changing to virtual, which was a no-no, but they did it anyway and no one has prosecuted them, as a way to like take a hard vote and then just, hide from the camera or just not respond to comments. So we are watching that closely. They will likely codify some of the changes next year, and we are actively working with the legislature to try to ensure that whatever passes is not overtly harmful, which I think is the best we can hope for.
Great. All right. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Let's go over to Puerto Rico. We have Cecile Blondet, the director there. We've enjoyed working with Maria. She's been attending a lot of the monthly directors meetings there, so we really appreciate it. But glad to have you with us today for the first time.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join the coalition. I just wanted to say that it's been very inspiring to hear all of you, and we probably come from the same background in terms of the challenges that we face. So here at Espacios Abiertos, we're always asking, where is our money? How is our money spent? Who decides how it's spent? So instead of lots of words, I like to use lots of pictures, as you can see in our presentation, because I think it's important to see and to think about the people that we do this for. We have to be reminded all the time about this. So our biggest challenge here in Puerto Rico continues to be the lack of transparency in the allocation, distribution, disbursement, and use of public funds pertaining to the recovery after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Local government and Congress have agreed on a plan for the investment of over $125 billion in 10 years. But 3 years have passed since the hurricanes and thousands of families continue to sleep under a blue tarp roof. And the transparency portal that the government prepared at the public's request is shy of the information that citizens really want to know. It actually began on the wrong foot when the $81 million contract for the portal was not published in its entirety. So I hear what you guys are saying, because it's the same situation here. In terms of our biggest win, I think it's a historic one for Puerto Rico. When the first ever tax expenditure report was published, less than 12 months ago, Espacios Abiertos had sued the government and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court for the publication of the tax expenditure report, especially now that we're facing so many austerity measures regarding the restructuring of the debt. And we saw that some folks were not getting the cuts that the people were getting cut on the essential services. So just before the ruling was made by the Supreme Court, the government finally published the report, and it revealed that each year we gave away in the form of tax incentives and credits over $20 billion. And that's a considerable amount when the annual budget of Puerto Rico is roughly $10 billion per year. In terms of our biggest setback, it happened right after the protest that ousted Governor Rosselló. After the governor had resigned, he signed 60 bills into law in total obscurity, including an open data and transparency law. And it's ironic in the sense that those laws, instead of opening government more, they are expanding on the exclusions and the excuses to deny access to government information. So I just wanted to say that it's been a pleasure to listen to all of you. I just wanted mine to be brief, but I leave you with those pictures of El Morro and the protest and the recognition that at least those people know that where $20 billion of our money are being spent annually. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecile. Glad to have you with us. And Espacios Abiertos as well. So let's switch over to Tennessee and Deborah Fisher, who you all heard in our last session talking about legislative tracking. What's going on in Tennessee, Deborah?
Well, in terms of biggest wins, probably getting the Reporters Committee Local Legal Initiative into Tennessee was a real win for at least the news media members of our coalition. That has been a terrific resource for them. And I call it a win because I wrote the application, but we got, it wasn't just me who put in the application. So I know that Colorado has that. And anyway, I've spent a lot of time this year working really closely with that attorney and just trying to trade information and share information with him. That's been a really great relationship. Also this year, we did successfully work with the governor's office on the executive order related to electronic meetings when the pandemic hit. And that order has gone through a few revisions, and the one that starts October 1 is a little bit better. And I think we learned some things about these electronic meetings, and I share concerns about them. I think we have problems with the public participation part. We have problems with people meeting in person meeting via Zoom when in fact, they're opening, the school board meets via Zoom, but they open the school. So, they won't meet, where people can actually go hear them. And then, even things like identification of people when they're speaking, or no requirement that they be visible in the Zoom. So there are lots of issues, and I'm really concerned about that because I do think that the good thing is people like watching their governing bodies if they can electronically while sitting from home. The bad news is that you don't have, sometimes that's the only time you get a chance to interact with people if you actually go to the meeting. And so there have been some complaints too. So I have a feeling they will try to codify some things. And so we'll be trying to watch that pretty hard. We worked actually with a broader coalition to kind of push for access to courtrooms or, alternative access during the pandemic. I will not say that we were successful. We did petition the Tennessee Supreme Court, and they said, well, we don't know that anybody's denying access. And so we actually are still working on getting them some examples since then. And I'm talking about where they've denied access to the public into courtrooms and not provided any alternative, like through video or something like that. So, but the good thing for us is it's we actually for the first time worked with some justice initiatives and things like that. So that was really a good relationship building. We also just won an open meetings lawsuit yesterday at the trial court level, unrelated to COVID. That was, whoops, really good. That's my timer. Okay, well, I'm going to just go over a little bit. We did pass 2 pieces of legislation before everybody left for COVID. They weren't major. One of them was cleanup. One of them had to do with retention. And then let's see, biggest setback, just awful delays in access to public records. They were bad before, they're worse now. What's to come? We're really concerned about Marsy's Law. Luckily, that did not get to change the Constitution. Luckily, we have really strict procedures on getting constitutional change in Tennessee. But the version presented here would create a new right of privacy for crime victims. And after seeing how things have played out in Florida and elsewhere, we just think that creates a lot of problems with access to court records, even records on like where crimes occurred. We heard about the law enforcement claiming the victim status. So we're really pushing on that and trying to make it more of a First Amendment issue in terms of access to courts, as well as a safety issue in terms of people like knowing where crimes occur in their neighborhood, because under the privacy issue, you know, some locations could be withheld. So that's our biggest thing. We're concerned about COVID. I'm terrified about the legislative session and maybe having limited access. I think that's going to be a big problem. We haven't been happy with it. I mean, our legislature is there in person. The Senate won't allow you in, but the House will. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but it's going to be different. It's going to be hard for groups like us. I think it's not going to be as hard for like the professional paid lobbyists. You know, it's going to be hard for public interest groups like us, I think. So that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Deborah.
Yep.
All right, let's go over to Texas. Kelly Shannon. Kelly, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So ours is one of those few legislatures that does not meet every year. So we did not meet this year. But in looking at a big win, I'll point back, you said 2019 to 2020. And I touched on this last year, but the bill had not finally passed when we had our meeting in Dallas. But there was a big contracting transparency bill that was passed that we were very, very involved in. It's quite intricate. We had a lot of different parties come to the table, and it's passed. It took effect in January. So we consider that a big win, but the devil will be in the details. We're trying to see how it's implemented, how it's used. So far, we are seeing some governments and private entities trying to keep contracts private still, and those are having to go up to the Attorney General's office for rulings. So we're going to have to watch and see how the AG's office rules. But just by way of background, our Texas Supreme Court had a really horrible ruling in 2015 where almost every public contract could be placed off limit to public view. I mean, the entire contract. So now this bill that we got passed last year makes certain items like, you know, the total cost, the line item pricing, the promises made, you know, some of the major contract provisions all are super public and have to be out there. What could still be argued over is if there's a detail or two in the contract that's proprietary. So again, we'll see how that plays out. So that, you know, we were all excited about that big victory going into 2020. And, you know, before the pandemic hit, I had my Sunshine Week column all written, championing this, talking about it. And then bam, pandemic hits. So just like the rest of you, we've had lots of problems with information being blocked during the pandemic, whether it's at meetings, the Texas Public Information Act, which deals with records. We have a huge fight that we're dealing with right now. And some of you have alluded to this in your states too, where certain governments going by AG past guidelines that really just dealt with an occasional snow day or hurricane day. They're citing those guidelines as saying, well, our office is physically closed. Today doesn't count as a day where we have to respond to Public Information Act requests. And those guidelines were meant for only the occasional day here or there, not for months and months on end. So we're seeing a patchwork around the state of our Public Information Act and how it's being used and enforced. Some governments are responding and doing what they should, many are not. So what we are doing is we are working with the Attorney General's office kind of on an informal basis to see if they can provide some updated guidelines. We're pointing out examples of this as much as we can to make the public aware. And then we're gearing up for having to address it in the coming legislative session too. So far, there has not been a court case about it, but you know, there's word out there that something like that could emerge as well. One positive for us though during this pandemic blocking of information was, like some of you, we really waged the fight to get that nursing home and assisted living information, like where the COVID clusters were, so that loved ones can see, hey, is our nursing home a place where it's safe? or if you're having to consider that for a relative, you ought to be able to see, what's going on in a particular care situation. So our Health and Human Services Commission had taken the position it wasn't going to release such information. We at the FOI Foundation issued a very detailed open letter to the Health and Human Services Commission, and a number of other media organizations and other entities had made public records requests as well. And in the end, the Attorney General's office did rule that information had to be released. It didn't violate health privacy laws or anything. So that was a positive. There are still some local health authority laws that are in play that are blocking release of similar types of information of COVID clusters. So those are kind of the highlights. We've certainly had lots of open meetings problems during this. Many governments have kind of gotten their act together and gotten it straightened out the more they've gotten accustomed to how to use Zoom and how to put certain procedures in place. Although we're still, I just heard of one just today. I mean, we're still having these constantly, we're hearing about. So next challenge, our legislature meets again in January, and dealing with all this fallout from the pandemic and blocking of information will be our top priority, because essentially what's happened is governments have just been allowed to just thumb their nose at the Public Information Act. So we are looking very closely at how to combat that, how to write legislation to deal with it, how to clarify legislation, and that will be a very big challenge. Again, even between now and then, we're working with the AG's office and trying to work with the governor's office to see if there's anything they might do to help the situation. But that's all the work in progress. And as Deborah just mentioned, we don't know what the situation is going to be with our actual access to the Capitol come January. We hear all kinds of different reports, and some say that it's just going to be pretty much shut down. No one's going to be able to go in except the legislators themselves. Everything else will just be on video feed. We've also heard some say, they're probably not even going to do anything except just deal with the budget for a while until later in the spring. So we just don't even know how our lay of the land will be in our ability to press the legislation we want to press, but we're going to find a way to do it.
Got it. Thank you, Kelly. Well, good luck on session next year on that.
Thank
definitely.
you.
All right. So I recognize the room, but I don't recognize the individual. If that's Megan, I didn't know if you were headed to the beach or the Kentucky Derby. But I'll tell you what, speaking of the Derby, why don't you get us across the finish line here with a report from Virginia there? Is that?
Yeah, I don't do tropical really, so I did have a drink and a t-shirt. Here comes the sun. So that's my contribution. And since I am finishing up, I've got great news. We've been invaded by aliens, and they believe that everything should be open all the time. And they've given us $10 million. So I'm done. But okay, not really. So our biggest wins and losses. Like everyone else, but I'm going to go ahead and focus on the legislative world, and that is that on the upside, we have been, as an organization, more proactive in actually developing legislation this year, and a little bit last year as well. We have established we've had relationships for a while with certain lobbyists and advocacy groups, but now actually working more in the weeds with them to actually develop the legislation, especially with groups that maybe we'd had good relationships with in the past, but now we're actually, working more directly with them. The legislator who represents both me personally and the organization is the House Majority Whip, and he's pro-transparency. So those are good characteristics to have in someone who will carry some legislation for us. So those are all positive developments.
On the downside is that with this, in Virginia, the Democrats took control of both houses of the legislature for the first time in 25 years this year. And a lot of the new Democrats who have come in are very, very privacy oriented. Privacy of victims and privacy of wrongly accused people, especially people of color or anyone in marginalized communities. So we're having to try to educate them on how the two how you can still have access and still protect some of those communities and individuals as well. Our legislature is currently meeting in a special session. The 100-member House of Delegates is meeting via Zoom, and the 40-member Senate is meeting in person at a museum in a big giant conference room. They have the drill down, and it's not been as bad as I thought it would be, but I can't imagine what it's going to be like in 2021. And speaking of 2021, what's coming up for us is to continue work on HB 5090, which is a bill that I originally drafted, but doesn't look anything like what I originally drafted, which is probably a good thing. But it is ultimately aimed at opening up some criminal investigative files that are no longer active. In Virginia, if it's once a criminal investigative file, always a criminal investigative file, and there's no end. So this bill is trying to open that up some, and it passed the House, and it got a really good hearing in the Senate, owing in large part to the fact that some of the witnesses were these family members of people who were killed in the Virginia Beach municipal shooting last Memorial Day weekend. They had some really powerful testimony that took away the law enforcement argument that they can't release records because it would harm victims, it would traumatize victims. Well, here were a bunch of victims saying, we want these records. In addition, the bill's sponsor is a former TV reporter whose girlfriend was shot on air in 2016. So it's also difficult for people to say, oh, no, you don't, when he has suffered it directly. I hate that that's like something that I can exploit, but it is definitely resonating with some legislators who in the past would have immediately tuned it out. So that's all I got. I'm going back to the aliens.
All right. Thanks, Megan. And thanks, everybody. I'd like to open up if anyone has any comments or any questions, based on anyone's presentations here. We've got the slide deck that goes through, though. This is a recording here as well. I'm looking forward to going back through the deck here and trying to put some themes together, what we're hearing, because certainly there are some commonalities across the board for a number of the states and jurisdictions out there. But just want to open it up. Anyone have any comments or questions, observations? Keith.
Yeah, I have to amend what I said earlier or add to it, because I did not mention that our biggest challenge in the state of Delaware was the fact that our legislative session was essentially shut down for almost the entire duration of it. So everything was basically suspended, including our initiatives. That was one of our biggest obstacles.
Got it.
But
okay.
I think everybody did a really good job. I appreciated hearing and seeing all of this. And there are some points I want to go back and look at myself. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments. Anyone else? I know now it's time for boat drinks, right? Umbrellas, fruit sticks, those kind of things to kick back unless you've already started ahead of time here.
What time is it in Florida anyway? Is it?
Yeah, it's about about 4:50. So yeah, we still have about 10 minutes left on this one. I mean, as you all probably know, I'm a horrible timekeeper. But I think, I really got a lot out of everybody's presentations and hearing a lot of angst out there. I always think about this. I always think when I'm hearing these, last year we heard the same thing here is just the challenges that everybody is working with in their jurisdictions there. And, Tom kind of hit it, looked at his slides from last year to see what kind of movement they had. And again, this pandemic has just been a punch in the gut, so to speak, with a lot of the efforts out there, not only just for us, but for everybody out there and on the public sector side as well, and how we rebound. We're the concern we have is, this bar of transparency lowering because of a lot of the challenge that have happened over the last 8 months or so. When the legislature comes together next year in these states, what are we going to see out of that in terms of any concerns that's going to impact the current open government laws and move us back a couple of notches instead of moving us forward in some cases? So that's going to be really an important area for us to follow as an organization.
Absolutely. I thought all of the presentations were really good and really eye-opening. There was one thing that kind of intrigued me. Someone made a reference to an existing California law with regard to taking pictures of public records with your cell phone and not having to pay fees. If anyone knows anything about that law and could send me a citation, I'm interested, because we currently charge full fees in Idaho, regardless of how the copy's made. And that seems silly.
I think that
Indiana is, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. That was me. I remember last year learning about it at, I think in this lightning round last year. I do have the citation, although not with me at the moment. It's in my actual office in Hartford. So I'd be happy to send it to you if I can track it down.
Wonderful.
Well, and also, I'll share Indiana's as well. Inspections can be with your own equipment and there's no payment.
Great.
Danny,
yeah, I mean, you want to set up camp with a big scanner or something? Yeah, it's all yours.
In New Mexico, you can take in your phone, you can take in your own scanner, you can do anything, and to stop it. But there's nothing in our code that allows that. So people do, and I've heard of attorneys rolling in their own copy machines and using the power and just making copy after copy. You only have to pay for it if you take the actual copy out of the building.
William, did you have a comment?
Well, I think in listening to everyone here, as you said earlier, there are themes with every single state and territory. And, is there going to be an opportunity where we can, put together a think tank as a coalition and create some type of legislation or measure that we are able to initiate at a national level so that all of our freedom of information laws are in line? I mean, I know here in Guam, as small as we are in a territory, we are facing the exact same challenges as everyone else is. And it just, for me, seems a little bit disjointed in, state to state. And as a coalition, is there a way that we can kind of list all these challenges and kind of line up some of these laws so that, freedom of information across the state and territories are the same, right? I mean, I know we have these overarching themes of, fees here and all these other stuff, but, is there a movement that the coalition can create just to kind of, posture ourselves as a force to be reckoned with in that sense with regards to open government? Because I think now more than ever, even in the existence of this coalition, we are seeing that there is some major opportunity in open government, in transparency. And, we're now faced as a coalition to either be passive and accept the laws in how they are, or take some actions like possibly in Betsy Russell's area to have the Supreme Court rule. And, those are big wins. I think that was Betsy's area. But, you know, that's something that I would like to see with the coalition. How can we, with all of our experience, coordinate some type of movement that we all can get behind, lobbying the legislative branches of government to really effectuate change, right? And that's something that I would like to see.
Oh, excellent point, William. Anyone? Okay. Yeah, I think that's something that's come up a few times, especially, you know, around fees or exemptions, and just, you know, one of the things that we had talked about was, you know, looking at those states that have their open government laws as part of their state constitution, as opposed to something, you know, on the legislature side that we saw a number of states where we saw emergency declarations declared during COVID, but in some of those states, they weren't able to rescind some of those because they were part of their state constitution, right, Pamela, in Florida on a couple of things there. So, you know, that's another area that could be on a national scale to looked at in a macro sense across all states' jurisdictions there. All right, well, I think we're good here. We covered a lot of ground today, and I really appreciate everyone putting together the slides and taking time to present here today. And we all deserve a happy hour regardless of your time zone, William. Bloody Marys are always nice this time of day there. Anyone else? Are we good? Okay, thank you all so much, and we'll look forward. You know, we've got tomorrow. We have 3 really strong sessions. We've got the you know, culminating in the authors, the research papers tomorrow afternoon that are going to be presented, and the breakout sessions for those. I really encourage you all to participate. You know, these authors worked hard on these research papers, and it'd be great if you all could stop in and, you know, click on 1 or 2 of these sessions just to show your support for the work they're doing. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the papers, but, you know, they're published out there on the agenda there as well, so you can look at those ahead of time. And I think we're going to have some really good information shared there. And then, of course, on Thursday, Denise Mallon from IRE is going to provide the hands-on data training webinar that the IRE usually charges for. And she's coming off what I believe was a successful IRE virtual conference that just ended last week. So we're really happy to have her here as well. And then thanks everybody else for being part of the summit. And we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thanks again. Bye-bye.